One of the most effective ways to fish docks that I found all around the country, and I grew up doing it around here, is actually finesse fishing these docks. So what I mean by finesse fishing is, using spinning gear, using my Hartwell Magic or kind of shaky rod, and using finesse baits to do this. The shaky head and the wacky worms, my two favorite for doing this. But the reason I like to finesse fish these docks quite often is a lot of your fish bite on docks on the fall. So these finesse baits are like great baits to fish to catch on the fall. Even though you got the light line and everything, it's gets a lot more bites. So yeah, you might lose a fish here and there, but if you get a lot more bites than you do on your casting gear. I love to throw a jig around docks, but sometimes the finesse stuff just works better, and it's easy to put where you need to. So like I mentioned, the shaky head and the wacky worm work really good because they're great baits. Like this is an 1/8 ounce shaky head. They're great baits for fish eating it on the fall. So with that being said, when you skip under a dock, even with a spin reel, you want to watch your braid laying on the water. You want to be ready in case something grabs out in the fall, because the longer they have it, the better chance they have to run around something or to crazy places and get hung up. So when I'm using finesse gear, I mean, I've got 10-pound tests. So I don't have that light a line. But when I'm using finesse gear around these docks, you have to be a little more careful, I guess you'd say, with your cast than you do with, say, a jig on 20-pound test. So when I'm targeting these docks, you got a lot of poles. This specific lake, they're not floating docks, they're pole docks. So they've got a lot of cover to them. But what you got to pay attention to when you're fishing these, I see a lot of people I take fishing docks, and they can cast well and they get their bait under there, but they're constantly getting hung. Or if they do get a bite, they break the fish off. So you have to pay attention a lot more with this finesse gear on where you're throwing. What I mean by that, like this shady dock here, I want to get my bait way under it, which is no problem, but it's got this cross beam across the front and it's got another one under there. The key when you get over these cross beams with the shaky head or the wacky worm is you don't want to, number one, you don't want to pop your bait against them, because your hook won't come out and get hung as long as you don't pop it against them. And you never want to make angle cast. So that pole right there, I had to come beside this dock near the bank to cast under it because I need to cast at 90 degrees to that pole. And what that 90 degrees allows is when you're pulling this shaky head up to it, it doesn't slide into a groove of wood, or it doesn't kind of the hook pop out because it's pulling crossways on it, or slide into a cross beam between where the two woods come together. It actually pulls 90 degrees straight over it. So you got to pay a lot more attention to where you're casting when you're fishing these docks with finesse gear versus a jig. A jig still gets hung in the cross beams. Oh, I had a bite. Spit it out. But the shaky head is a very, very weedless bait. It's just you have to be careful on how you approach it to the docks, especially when you're trying to get way under there. It goes for dock fishing in general, but specifically with this lighter line. You want to make sure you can get the fish out. I'm not saying don't throw way back in there, because that's something you can figure out after you get the bite. But you want to throw in areas, you want to present your bait to the areas, wait till you get the right angle so you won't break them off when you do get it back in there. Oh, there's a bite. It's a better spot. Get on up in here. It's a pretty nice spotted bass on the shaky head, and that fish got it. It hit the bottom, but he got really quickly. And luckily I felt him quick. So as soon as I set the hook, I got him out of the dock with this light line. It's just a fall, skinny spotted bass. When I'm rigging my trick worms on shaky head, I always bite the tip off just to make it a little flatter. And then just hook it in 1/4 inch or so. Push it up and turn it around and keep it as straight as you can. And you want to keep an eye on your bait as you're skipping, because skipping, the hook will come out. That'll cause you to get hung. So you want to keep a fresh worm on and keep it, make sure your hook stays in it. Whenever you're skipping docks with a shaky head, it's a lighter bait. So I'm not gonna say you're fishing as fast as you would say a jig, but you want to pay attention. Like that last bite I have, my bait actually made it to the bottom. So for the day anyway, I'm gonna at least make sure my bait gets all the way down to the bottom when I skip it under there. Whereas some days, every single one you catch are gonna eat it like as it falls in, like it's gonna sink inches and you'll have them. So if that's happening, then obviously you don't have fish quite as slow. So you wanna really pay attention to how your bites come, because you can be a lot more efficient. Yeah, if you let it go to the bottom on some days, would you maybe catch a few more? Maybe, but you're gonna fish a whole lot more docks by only fishing it for the fall. So it's a finesse technique, and finesse is kind of thought of as slow fishing, but I wouldn't really say this is that slow of fishing. When you're skipping docks, waves are your biggest nemesis. Waves always make it more challenging to get your bait under the dock. There's not really any surefire ways to not have problems when you're doing it. You just makes it more frustrating. So when it comes to types of docks, gotta put like docks are a pattern, but you gotta kind of put a pattern together among the docks. Like right now what we're doing, I mean, this is kind of a more a spotted bass lake. So I know spotted bass are gonna be more main water. And that's kind of what we're targeting is spotted bass. So with that being said, I'm gonna target mostly docks on the main lake versus, you know, backs of creeks, things like that. Whereas if you're fishing for more largemouth, you might find them in the backs of creeks or whatnot, but you wanna pay attention to the type of docks that seems like you're getting bit on, because a lot of times it'll be a pattern and you can kind of eliminate a big portion of the docks on the lake. Boat positioning is huge when you're fishing docks with anything, but especially this finesse gear. Is like most of the docks, if this is not a real big dock, but I know this dock I need to kind of approach from the side. Make a bad cast there, but I need to approach most docks from the side, because I need to get in those slips where there's no cross beams. Whereas if I just go across the front of it, you know, I got cross beams in the way to not allow me to get the bait where I need to get it, or not be able to get that fish out if I get him. When I'm fishing docks, I like to fish fast, slowly, or slowly fast, if that makes sense. I keep the trolling motor on high and move pretty quick, but I make sure my boat is in the right position on each dock. And my power poles are a huge factor in doing that. Is, you know, I'll kind of approach the dock faster than I want to fish, and then right when I get in position, I'll drop the power poles. If you don't have power poles, you just have to kind of turn the boat and get ready to stop your momentum earlier than you would with power poles. With power poles, you can just kind of put the brakes on. Little largemouth. So that, the wacky worm, a lot of times, the shaky head is a lot better for spotted bass quite often, but then largemouth seem to like a wacky worm a lot better quite often. That fish was inches deep under there, barely even sank. But a lot of times the wacky worm zoom fluke stick will catch the largemouth a lot better, and the shaky head will catch the spots a lot better. Both finesse techniques, but you know, depending on what you think you're targeting, you might can have more success with one or the other. With a spinning rod skipping docks, you actually, if you get too close, it's much more difficult than if you're farther away. Like for some reason, just the angle doesn't work out well. Like I stay a lot farther when I'm skipping with a finesse gear versus skipping with a bait caster. It's a lot easier to get that cast under there with kind of a lower trajectory angle. Then you don't have to worry about backlashing. A lot of times, especially even later in the year, like the fall, or you know, sometimes it happens in the spring too, as we get cooler water in your fishing docks. A lot of the fish will actually position kind of out front of the docks. A lot of times, majority of, you know, good docks have like some old brush, or maybe some chairs fell off the dock, or just debris out front of it. And a lot of fish, you want to pay attention to, are they positioning on the fronts of the docks or actually under them? Because even though the brush might just have them up there and not necessarily the dock itself, it's just a very likely area for brush. So you want to pay attention to where you get those bites. Are they way under there? Are they on the outside? Or where are they? Once your worm starts getting torn up, a lot of times I'll use a trick worm, you know, for a while. But as your worm starts getting torn up, you really want to get a new worm every time, because you're just going to contribute to getting hung. You want to take your best chances to get your bait out of there. So a new worm helps a lot. Take the head off and go down just a little bit. A ball head, shaky head, in my opinion, is by far the best for doing this. You can watch my shaky head video on why, but your hookup ratio is a lot better with just the traditional ball head versus the spring lock kind. When you are fishing these docks, that dock right there has something that you always want to pay attention to. I know a lot of people know this, but anytime somebody puts rod holders on their dock, like this dock right here, very, very likely that they also put brush out in front of the rod holders because they're probably using them for crappie fishing, and that's just a good sign that that might be a likely spot. You want to pay attention to likely spots on all the docks. I mean, whether it's sometimes, you know, it's the walkway or the shadiest part of the dock, the biggest part of the platform. You just want to throw to everything that's the high percentage places on the dock. If you fish every pole in this whole dock, you're gonna fish 5 docks in a day, and that just doesn't work. So you gotta kind of look for the likely spots on it where you think the fish might live. This was a good example of those cross beams. This dock has cross beams on the side, and I could throw 90 degrees over them. But if you're patient, just wait till you go around the front, and you can throw under the front and not have to deal with the beams. So you wanna kind of pick your angles at every dock, kind of like how you're gonna play this dock. Are you gonna throw just however you get the boat, or if you take your time, your likelihood of getting them out goes up a lot. Oh God, that was a big one. And that's what happens sometimes with light line on docks. But I don't know, that fish may would have never bit if I hadn't been using this finesse gear. Try the wacky worm. Little guys around the ladder though. When you hook one on anytime under these docks, you just kind of want to keep constant pressure. Not enough to break your line, but sometimes you will, obviously, if they get really hung up and saw it. But just keep constant pressure, and a lot of times they'll swim themselves out. If it's a really big fish, sometimes they're actually easier to get out because you don't pin them to a rail like you would those smaller ones. So when you hook one, just keep constant pressure, and if you got to go up there and get him, you got to go up there and get him. But hopefully you won't have to. So when it comes to fishing docks, I love fishing them, but sometimes finesse fishing is just more effective than, you know, your jig or your crawl or like your heavy line techniques. Sometimes finesse fishing gets more bites, especially on spotted bass lakes. Lakes with spotted bass, you know, the shaky head, the wacky worm, the nail weight worm, things like that get a lot more bites. So the rods I use when I'm finesse fishing docks, I pretty much limit it to 2 baits. Now I'll vary them a little bit, but for the most part, it's a wacky worm and a shaky head. And I've done a lot of videos on my wacky worm setup, things like that, but your typical Zoom fluke stick, hook right in the middle with a weed guard hook always around docks. And your 10-pound super braid with your 10-pound fluorocarbon leader. I always go at least 10 on my leader when I'm fishing around docks. I never go down to 8. Sometimes I'll even go up to 12 if I'm catching bigger fish. But the wacky worm, the only variation I'll do on the wacky worm is sometimes I put a nail weight in it to get it down a little bit more. But generally the wacky worm is for those kind of suspended fish, those that catch it as soon as you get under the dock and you just reel down and the fish is on there. That's when I use the wacky worm. The shaky head is very good bait when you've got more spotted bass than largemouth. Now it will catch the largemouth when they're on the bottom. When it's cooler, or maybe you just think they're on the bottom in general, or they're around the brush on the docks, the shaky head's a lot more effective than that wacky worm. The wacky worm's good when they're just relating to the shade of the dock. Shaky head, I always skip an 1/8 ounce. A 3/16 is drastically harder to skip than a 1/8 ounce. Don't know why. If you use a bigger bait, the 3/16 will skip. But when you're using a Zoom trick worm, which is what I use mostly, this is green pumpkin green. This is kind of my go-to color. This is about the only color I use, is green pumpkin green or some variation of green pumpkin. But green pumpkin green is the best color, in my opinion, for skipping docks. It looks like a crawfish, bluegill, something like that. But an 1/8 ounce shaky head with a trick worm is my go-to. I skip the shaky head on my kinda shaky rod. It's a little bit more difficult to skip because it's a little bit stiffer, but you've got a decent size hook on the shaky head, so you need to drive that hook in. So I use the kinda shaky for skipping a shaky head, whereas I'd use the Hartwell Magic for the wacky worm. If you have trouble skipping the shaky head, because it is more difficult than a wacky worm, you can go down to that Hartwell Magic rod. You may lose a few not getting the hook in them, things like that. But it's a lot easier to skip than the kind of shaky. The kind of shaky is a lot stiffer. The tip is what makes the skipping a lot better. Same setup on the shaky head, 10-pound fluorocarbon leader, 10-pound braid is kind of my go-to. And these two baits I probably have tied on all the time. I've done a lot of videos on them, kind of traditionally fishing them, but these are two of my favorite dock fishing baits when I need to finesse those docks.